I'm excited to be joined by Mr. David Chapa, senior analyst and co-founder at the CTE Group. David, how you doing?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Doing great. Thanks for being on the event today. I met you at a big data protection convention, and I learned all about your experience in disaster recovery and what you do now. For those who don't know you in the audience, let's just start off with, what do you do at the CTE Group?
Sure. So the CTE Group, the organization really is, it's a hybrid organization. So we do traditional analyst work. So we work with manufacturers in data protection, disaster recovery, business continuity, as well as data storage. But then we also work with the end user customers who are looking for insights into data protection platforms, into some ideas around disaster recovery, and just kind of giving customers a little bit more kind of wood behind the arrow when they're looking at building out their long-term strategies for their own environments.
Okay. So you go into companies, I assume large and small, and help them with their disaster recovery planning. Is that kind of what I'm getting?
Yeah, we help them with their planning. We can go in there and have a full team, and we can usually knock it out within a day, go through a full DR planning, and then hand over a document to the customer. So it's a pretty intense and condensed DR planning session. And what I like about the way that we do it, it's different than I've been doing in the past. This is a shift for me. It's really about focusing on the mission of the organizations. For too long, the old way of doing things was to let's run a business impact analysis, which I still believe is important to do. But let's do a business impact analysis in every single business unit, understand what the cost is if we don't have that business unit, and then let's roll that into our what-if scenarios, and let's build our plan. And that is very time-consuming. But when you kind of just simplify it, get down to the basics and say, okay, what's the mission of the business? If you're an airline, the mission for your business is to keep airplanes safely in the air and then safely landing on the ground and transporting your passengers and your cargo. So let's focus on those things. So what happens if? So then we kind of skip all over the business impact analysis. We go right to the mission, because quite candidly, if you're not getting planes in the air, it doesn't matter what business impact analysis result says how much you'll be losing an hour. You won't be making money if you can't get planes in the air. So we focus on the mission of the organization. And I think it really does streamline the whole process in getting to a solid DRBC plan.
Smart. Yeah, I like that. So, you've been in the industry a long time, 30 years, I saw in your bio. How have things changed in data protection and disaster recovery?
So, I have been in there for a long time, and it's changed, but yet it hasn't changed. So there's a lot of the things that we're doing today that we've been doing for a long time. We still do a lot of batch style data protection. We wait till a certain hour of the day, and we back everything up, and then we either back up to disk, back up to cloud, back up to some other medium. But where we have to see this progression is we're doing a lot more hot backups, live backups, but we're still kind of stuck in the grandfather, father, son, the old ways of doing things. I used to sling 288 meg disk packs that I would spin up and back up data to. We're not doing that today. Hopefully no one's doing that today. But we're still doing, that kind of backup. We're doing a batch backup. It starts here, ends here. And oh, by the way, during that time between the end of backup and the start of the next day's backup, we have a thing that I call exposure. Customers are exposed if there's a disaster, if there's a problem, if there's corruption, they're exposed because they've got to go back to the last night's backup, which can cost some money. So we've changed a bit. I still see a lot of customers still in that same kind of mode of backup operation. Okay.
And when you get started, talking with customers, I know you said you start with the end in mind and the company's business, what they need to do to be successful in their business and how to, protect that. I'm curious, what are some of the common pitfalls that you see in the process?
Well, I think some of the common pitfalls is when I get a customer to kind of buy into the idea of let's look at where you want to end up. What's the end in mind? Some of the pitfalls, it really gets down to project management. Customers want to, they see the process, they trust the process, but then management wants them to move this along a lot faster. And so they skip some steps. They get a little bit rebellious, I guess is a good word, and say, you know what, well, we got to get past this. We don't necessarily need to spend all the time on these things. Let's just skip a few steps. So that's one of them, right? And when you do disaster recovery, business continuity planning, it really would behoove you to not skip some of those important steps. And then also to communicate to your management the importance of taking the steps, why we're doing this. So I try to help customers that I talk to have a good style of communication line to their management so that they can let them know the reasons why we're doing it, the importance to our overall mission as an organization, and what the end result's going to look like. So I think skipping some steps is some of the common pitfalls. I think the other things too is trying to create one solution or one DR plan for everything. And we shouldn't be doing that. We should be talking with all the business unit managers and finding out what do we do day to day to keep the business running, and which one of those are critical, absolutely critical, that we have to have up first. So if we have 18 business units and we're going to declare a disaster, do we need to have all 18 up within 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours? What are the most critical ones? And I think those are some of the common pitfalls as well, is just not having that level of communication. You know, for a long time, IT has never been at the table helping to make the business decisions, but I think it's shifted quite a bit. That's some of the change that I've seen as well. IT is getting more of an opportunity to have a seat at the table, and I think it's our job in IT to really ask those hard questions and not be afraid to be, kind of pressing at the bull a little bit.
Right.
So those are the things that I see that really, I think, can cause some grief for customers.
Yeah. I can totally see that. I mean, when I was an IT manager, the biggest challenge with DR was that the applications and infrastructure were changing faster than we could, adapt our DR plan. So the DR plan was always wrong, constantly wrong. So I know we're running out of time in our little chat here. A few other quick questions. Today, we're going to hear a lot about disaster recovery as a service. I want to get your take on DR as a service.
So I like DR as a service. I think it's a great idea, great concept. There's a number of companies I worked for in the past that delivered DR as a service. But I think the thing that customers need to keep in mind is, DR as a service is going to be disaster recovery in the cloud somewhere. Some service can be offered up to you. And so you got to think about network. You got to think about the data. Just like I talked about before, what's the most important systems that we need to recover? And then make sure that you can get all that data to that disaster recovery cloud site, wherever it's going to be, so that when you do declare, you can spin everything up with all the most recent data. So network is very, very important, making sure you can move the amount of data that you need to move. And oh, by the way, for customers that are listening to this, if a service provider can seed your data, so now you're just sending incremental changes, that's something to look at. That's a great way to get around the whole network challenge, and then they're just incrementally updating. But I like DR as a service, but I think you got to really watch out and make sure that the data that you want will be there when you need to declare a disaster and then flip the switch.
Okay, great advice. What are 3 traits you look for when choosing a disaster recovery solution?
So that's a difficult one, but what I'll say is, when I look at DR as a service, I tell customers all the time, when you're looking at DR as a service vendors, interview them like you're interviewing someone who will be badged and have access to your data center, because essentially that's exactly what is going to happen. So encryption, look at encryption solutions, who holds the keys. If your DR as a service provider holds the keys, you need to understand that. I also look at the ability to kind of create documentation. Documentation is the worst animal in the world. All of us in IT hate it because you said it, things change so quickly, and I don't have time to update my documentation. So if you can find a solution that also will provide you some documentation and a step-by-step process to validate that your DR is going to work, home run.
Okay.
And lastly, I think the third one will be, it's got to be the people. The people that you're going to be partnering with from a vendor perspective. You got to make sure that the people are there and you're comfortable with them as a partner.
Great advice. Let's see. What do you see as the future? What's next in data protection?
So I've always said, like I talked about that exposure, that gap, I've always said that the biggest challenge we have in data protection is as soon as we touch a file, we modify a database, we're exposed. We may lose that work if there's corruption. So what I'm seeing is, I think I'm going to be seeing is applications getting a lot more intelligent. I think data protection is going to be built into a lot of the other systems, so we won't have to think or worry about it as much. And our focus will then shift on, let's look at disaster recovery business continuity from the mission perspective, because our applications are now self-healing, self-protecting to a degree. Now, if we have outages, that's what we need to work towards. So I think what we'll be seeing is more of a shift where data protection becomes table stakes, and then disaster recovery really becomes the focal point. I think more and more organizations really need to pay attention to DR. And what that means in their environment and how they bring up their systems in the event of disaster.
Okay. And if people want to get in touch with you, learn more about what you do, or maybe talk to you about your disaster recovery consulting, what should they do?
So they can go to my website, which is www.thectegroup.net. And just so people know, the CTE stands for Chief Technology Evangelist. That was one of my titles many, many years ago. And so I just made a company out of it. Or they can email me at david@thectegroup.net. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Twitter at David Chapa. You can find me. I'm not hidden at all. How can I hide in a shirt like this?
That is an awesome shirt. We don't have time to talk about your, well, that'll have to be a separate interview.
There you go.
I know you have an awesome band that you play in, and I really appreciate you being on the event today. Great information, great insight. Thanks, David.
Thank you.